Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now before we get into today's video, I would like to say a huge thank you to Thomas Too Good for sending in some awesome pictures of his Valhalla 1025th. These guys look really cool, and keeping with the Soviet theme we seem to be having this week. Really like the mixture of those old school weapon teams and those new sort of like grognard models and some of those metal psychers. There's a whole smorgasbord of old and new in here, converted Ogrins and a converted Taurox, or looks like maybe some sort of Katushka rocket launcher. Looks amazing. Thanks for these pictures in, Thomas. You've done the Valhalla and Ice Warriors proud there. Now, if anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, please post them on my Facebook page, or you can email them to me at mordianglorytv@gmail.com. And don't worry if you can't remember that. There will be a link down to the Facebook page in the description below, and the email will be down there as well. Now, without further ado, let's get into today's video. Now today, guys, I'm not going to be talking about Valhalla Ice Warriors, but I am going to be talking about their arch nemesis, the Greenskins. I'm going to be talking about the recent announcement by Games Workshop that, well, orcs are getting a lot tougher. So, for those that don't know, there's a Warhammer community article that was released, and it basically said that nearly everything in the orc army is going to be going up a pip of toughness. So, your standard orc boy now is going to be toughness 5, and your Gretchen are going to be toughness 3, which is really interesting. Now, I'm going to go through in this video the positives, the negatives of that, the implications from what seems like a small change but a really significant one, and also a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe history of how we've got here, I suppose. So the first thing, let's start the video off in the right way. Let's talk about the positives. Number one, it's obviously a massive buff for orc players. And as someone who has been getting into orcs recently on a very casual level, just having another army for the channel, another army for the battle reports, it's great to see that, I've been painting up orcs recently, and for the Games Workshop to come out and say, look, your orc army is going to be getting, way tougher across the board. That's only a big plus for me. And I know that a lot of orc players, Games Workshop tends to give them lots of like wacky stuff and cool stuff, but they often forget to give orcs useful stuff. And look, no one can deny how much of a big buff going up to toughness 5 can be. They're still got a 6-up save, so they're still, if you wound them, you're probably going to kill them. But then you do have things like the Beast Snaggers, or people have been nicknaming them like the Primaire Orcs because they're like Primaris Orcs. They've got an inbuilt 6-up invulnerable save, so that's kind of interesting. Now fishing for 6s is always difficult, so it's not much to rely upon. But it's something to be something to be aware of. Always having a 6-up save, always means you will stop 16% of the damage coming through, statistically. And when you start extrapolating this potential pip of toughness out, you start getting some crazy things. I mean, toughness 6 orc bikers, toughness 6 orc knob bikers. That's crazy. That's difficult. That will be a really powerful unit, having a toughness 6 fast unit like that, because it means traditional small arms, toughness 3 weapons, they're only going to be wounding them on 6s, which is as difficult to wound as like an armored vehicle, which is pretty crazy. It means power weapons, like a lot of people like power swords because they give you that extra strength. It won't matter, because power weapons will only make you, power swords will only make you toughness 5, strength 5, sorry, and that means you'll be still wounding those orc bikers on 5s and 6s. And then when you think about, well, that means all those Astartes chainswords and whatnot, they're going to be wounding on 5s and 6s as well. Makes it, it's a really big buff, and that's the positive of it, and it's definitely something that I think orc players will really be able to leverage. I mean, imagine a horde, 120, 180 orc boys charging across the battlefield, all toughness 5. That's pretty terrifying. Now, I like the buff. But there is one of the things I don't like about it, one of the negatives, is it makes for some weird weapon interactions. So what do I mean by this? So previously, a lasgun would wound an orc on a 5, and a bolter would wound an orc on a 4. And, you know, bolter, lasgun equivalent, bolter equivalent, would wound an orc on a 4. And that would mean that, you know, that was a very good representation. Because it meant, look, the lasgun, you're shooting an orc with it. It's not like shooting a man. You know, the orc will take a significant amount more pressure to put down. You know, if you're shooting a human with a lasgun, it's you know, wounding on a 4+. But shooting an orc, you're wounding on 5s and 6s. They are tough. They are tougher than your average human. Great. When you move to toughness 5, and it also represented, that the bolter, which is a gun which fires, you know, micro rockets, exploding ammunition, that is powerful enough that it could put an orc down, you know, 50% of the time. You know, bam, bam, your orc's dead, kind of thing. And that's cool. You know, that it was very good at showing the power of the bolter. And then it also meant that, look, orcs were resistant to small arms fire. And the way you got to put an orc down is you can't, you know, be piddling around with lasguns. You know, enough of them will bring one down. But what you really want to do is crack out the heavy weapons. You want heavy bolters for scything them down. You want battle cannons for blowing up huge chunks of mobs. That's how huge chunks of mobs. That's how you put orcs down. But now it's a bit funny because lasguns will still wound orcs on 5s, so they haven't changed. But your bolter is also going to wound your orc on 5s and 6s. So now the bolter is just as good at killing orcs, or just as bad, I should say, at killing orcs, as lasguns. And in fact, it's probably worse, because your bolter typically will get 2 shots. But your lasgun with first rank fire, second rank fire, is going to get 4 shots. Which means now lasguns are better at killing orcs than bolters. And that doesn't match up. That doesn't really match up fluff-wise. That doesn't really match up with what we know about... Well, it just sort of breaks the fourth wall a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, it's a bit unusual. And it only gets weirder when you start looking at heavy weapons. I mean, the heavy bolter, for example, traditionally, and we're not just talking traditionally in the fluff, we're talking traditionally on the tabletop, has always kind of been the anti-orc weapon. It's got a good rate of fire, it wounds them reliably, every edition, you know, and it also tends to cut through their armour, which is great. And now the heavy bolter wounds an orc on 4s. And again, that just feels weird. And maybe it's because I'm more of a traditionalist and I've played this game for a long time, but heavy bolters not being that good against orcs just feels wrong. Just feels weird. And then you start looking at the other heavy weapons. So you have things like las cannons, missile launchers. They now only wound orcs on 3s, not 2s, 3s. And we're talking crack rockets, by the way. Which is really, you know, and then you start extrapolating that. It's like, okay, so a las cannon has an equal amount of chance of wounding an Imperial Knight as it does of wounding an orc. And that's when it starts feeling really weird. That's when it starts feeling not right. You know? A las cannon has as much chance of wounding an Imperial Knight, a Titanic unit, a Bane Blade, a super heavy. An orc is just as likely to be wounded by a las cannon as it is to be wounded as an Imperial Knight is, as a super heavy is. And that's just... Do I need to say any more? So that's the negative, I would say. That's the funniness that I feel around it. Now, moving on, because I don't want to labour too much. I don't want to be focused on the negative too much. Moving on, what do I think this means for the meta? Well, it's a real tricky one, guys. I definitely feel like Games Workshop is pushing Toughness 5 to almost be the new standard. You know, like Toughness 5 infantry, that's the way you want to go. Or if you're not Toughness 5, some sort of reduction in damage. And if you're not reduction in damage, then just inbuilt transhuman physiology. You know, we're seeing quite a ramping up of toughness. And I suppose this is to counter the ramping up of lethality that we're seeing in 40k. But it's getting... If it's done properly, it'll work. If everything is very tough, and all the weapons are very powerful, then what it will do, that will balance it out. Then that will lead, that'll be okay. If all the weapons are really good, but the units are really tough, then that's fine. And what that does is, by adding more special rules and inflating stats and whatnot, that gives Games Workshop more room to maneuver when it comes to buffing things. And I suppose one of the problems you could say with 8th was that because it was so simple, the moment that you introduced a new rule to a unit, either as a buff or as a nerf, it totally skewed it, because there weren't a lot of special rules flying around. There weren't a lot of I suppose, interesting sort of things going on in 8th. It was very simple, it was very streamlined, but the moment you made a change, it had a huge ripple. Whereas if you've got lots and lots of complicated rules, you can tweak them slightly and it allows for more nuance. I get that. The risk is that if everything keeps getting more powerful and therefore everything keeps getting more durable, we'll be in this never-ending cycle. And it'll start getting just ridiculous. And the other problem is that we know from experience that Games Workshop is very inconsistent with how they hand out buffs and nerfs and whatnot. So it's really, I suspect that some factions will just simply get left out in the cold, and it won't be balanced, because not all factions are treated equally. A great example of this is look at Necrons. People complain about 9th edition armies versus 8th edition armies, but no one ever mentions Necrons when they're talking about that. They talk about Marines, they talk about Dark Elder, and then someone in a Reddit thread will inevitably go, well, don't forget about Necrons, and people go, oh yeah, Necrons. You see, so we've already seen it, and if you want to look back a little bit further, look at 8th edition, look at Genestealer Cult. There's a lot of people out there saying, oh, I can't wait for my codex to come out, because then I'll be super powerful. It's like, look at Genestealer Cult. They were one of the last codexes to be released, and when they dropped, were shit. They were good for a month because they were tricksy, but then they just fell off a cliff edge, and occasionally someone manages something crazy and they catches everyone by surprise. But by and large, Genestealer Cult have been pretty bad since they dropped, outside of that first couple of months. And I suppose that's my concern. If done properly, 9th edition can be incredibly balanced. But looking at the track record for stuff like this, I'm a little concerned. And I hope that's not coming over as overly salty or overly pessimistic. That's just me trying to be as balanced as possible, positive and negative. And I suppose the last thing I want to say before signing off for today is I wanted to give a little bit of context, a little bit of a history lesson. So 7th edition is often seen as one of the least balanced editions. There were so many crazy, wacky things that were going on. And Orcs in 7th edition were pretty poor, but they had some interesting builds. And Green Tide was one of the few things that Orcs could do to be pretty competitive in 7th edition. In 7th edition, Orcs were Strength 3, Toughness 4. Okay? They did have Furious Charge, which meant on the turn they charged, they were an extra strength. But that was it. Now, 2 editions later, we've got Orcs which are a default strength 4, with Beast Naggers being a default strength 5. They're now Toughness 5, so potentially your standard Orc boy has gone up 2 pips of toughness and has gone up 2 pips of strength and a pip of toughness, and his chopper is now AP -1. Do you kind of see now why some of us Longbeards are a bit concerned about power creep? And it's only going to keep getting more and more ridiculous. It's only going to keep getting, more out of hand. And I know I say this fairly often, but I think I know where the turning point was, when Games Workshop went from balancing the game to when they started going on the crazy train. And it was just before Vigilus dropped in 8th edition. And they were doing such a good job up until Vigilus dropped in 8th edition. And they dropped Vigilus, and that, which was the expansion pack for those that you don't know that have joined in 9th edition. They dropped Vigilus, and I said then that was going to be the first step on the road to Crazy Town, and that everything was going to get out of hand from that point on. And it did. And Games Workshop have taken some steps backwards, so they, they've reined Marines in a bit, but it's still pretty crazy. I mean, if you look at where Marines are now in comparison to where Marines were in 8th edition, where you could argue they were struggling a bit, but you still saw them at every tournament. People were still making them work. They're so much more powerful than pre-Vigilus. And so it's just a bit of a... I know I bang on about it, so I'm not going to say any more about it, but I just think... like I said, I think if handled right, this could be a really good addition. I'm just a little concerned that it's getting a little out of hand, all these buffs. I'm concerned that historically we've not had everything dealt with properly. And the biggest thing is that codexes are not released all at the same time. And the difference between a 9th edition codex now and 8th edition codex is horrendous. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more next week. But putting an 8th edition codex up against a 9th edition codex, even including Necrons, it's a foregone conclusion. And you see this on all the YouTube battle reports, you see this everywhere. It's very difficult for an 8th edition army to win against a 9th edition army. Can be done, don't get me wrong. There are exceptions that prove the rule. Sisters of Battle for 8th, Necrons for 9th, it can be done. And of course, there's always, luck, and there's always being a great pilot of an army and all that kind of stuff. But by and large, we don't speak in specifics. We speak in generalizations when we're talking about the overall situation. So that we don't look at anecdotal outside data. We look at the core, and the core is that 8th edition codexes are struggling, and it's going to be difficult taking on orcs now with the guard. It's going to be difficult. A million conscripts is probably the way to go. Maybe the Rylands had the right idea. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope it's not been overly negative. I've tried to be as balanced as possible. I know, Mordian Glory being balanced. What is this craziness? It's just going to be interesting. I guess my final thoughts on this would be, let's see where we go. Let's see where this mad sleigh ride ends up. Anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have enjoyed what you've listened to today, please consider heading on over to the Patreon. All the money from the Patreon gets reinvested back into the channel. I use it for new terrain, going to tournaments, and all that kind of stuff. Do the battle bunker, video battle reports, all that kind of stuff. And of course, a huge thank you to my current Patreon supporters. You guys are amazing. I really appreciate all the support that you guys give. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and of course, I'll see you guys next time.